What unfolds when one of Africa's most outspoken young leaders directly challenges the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia about the essence of Islam and does so on live television? The answer sent ripples through the Muslim world, creating a diplomatic storm that lingered well beyond the event. The African Union summit in Addis Ababa had been scheduled as a straightforward diplomatic assembly. Yet the encounter between Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman evolved into one of the most debated religious confrontations ever aired globally. The date was March 15th. What began as a discussion on Islamic leadership in modern Africa swiftly transformed into a theological standoff that seized international headlines. The backdrop was the AU's newly built conference center filled with representatives from all 54 African nations. At the polished mahogany table sat 5 prominent figures, but soon all attention narrowed to 2. The 35-year-old soldier turned leader from Burkina Faso and the 39-year-old Saudi heir apparent. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman opened with a speech many considered predictably diplomatic. He reiterated Saudi Arabia's pledge to support Islamic nations in Africa through Vision 2030 projects, emphasizing the kingdom's custodianship of the 2 holy mosques and the importance of unity among Muslim nations under long-established governance traditions. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, he stated in formal Arabic with simultaneous English translation, remains committed to fostering authentic Islamic leadership grounded in interpretations that have guided the UMA for over 14 centuries. Traoré listened carefully, jotting notes in French. When it was his turn, the room's energy shifted. His tone was firm, his conviction unmistakable. Your Highness, he began with all due respect to the kingdom's history, I must address a contradiction I see in your vision of Islamic leadership. Observers noticed a subtle tightening in the Crown Prince's posture, a sign to those familiar with his demeanor that the exchange had taken an unexpected turn. You speak of authentic leadership, Traoré continued, while your kingdom engages in practices that contradict Quranic principles of justice, equality, and compassion for the oppressed. How do you reconcile this with the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who stood with the poor and marginalized? The silence in the hall was telling. Direct theological challenges in such forums were rare. Delegates shifted in their chairs and television cameras zoomed in on the 2 leaders' expressions. Prince Muhammad's reply was deliberate yet firm. Captain Traoré, our interpretation of Islam rests on centuries of scholarly consensus and the guidance of religious authorities. We safeguard the holy sites and aid Muslim communities worldwide. But Traoré pressed on undeterred. Consensus built to preserve power structures that oppress the people Islam came to liberate is not divine guidance. It is political control disguised as religion. The Quran states in Surah Al-Hijr that God created us into nations and tribes so we may know one another. Not so that some may claim superiority through proximity to holy sites or oil wealth. The Crown Prince's jaw tightened. You confuse political grievances with religious interpretation. No, Your Highness, Traoré countered. You confuse political convenience with religious truth. In his farewell sermon, the Prophet declared, no Arab is superior to a non-Arab, no white to a black, except by piety and good deeds. Yet your kingdom sustains systems that betray this principle. Then came the moment that would go viral. Traoré rose from his seat, a breach of formal protocol, and addressed the still-seated Crown Prince. The Islam I follow is one of liberation, not one of comfort for the powerful. It is not an Islam that signs arms deals with those who bomb Muslim children in Yemen, nor one that treats migrant workers as modern slaves. The prince's composure wavered. Captain, your accusations are inflammatory and inappropriate for this forum. Truth will always be inflammatory to those who profit from falsehood. Traoré replied, the Quran commands us in Surah Al-Baqarah to stand firmly for justice, even against ourselves or our kin. That is all I am doing. The tension in the hall was so palpable that even seasoned diplomats leaned forward, sensing the historic nature of the exchange. Social media teams in various delegations began discreetly typing summaries to send back home. Within minutes, hashtags in multiple languages started trending. But the debate wasn't over. The moderator, a respected Ethiopian scholar, attempted to redirect the conversation toward unity and cooperation. Yet Traoré raised his hand again. If unity is built on silence about injustice, he said, it is false unity. The Quran tells us in Surah and Nisa to speak the truth even if it is bitter. I am not here to insult. I am here to remind us all of what Islam demands. Crown Prince Mohammed adjusted his headset, his voice measured but with an unmistakable edge. Captain Traoré, I recognize your passion, but you must also recognize that leadership requires pragmatism. The kingdom's role as guardian of the holy sites is not merely symbolic. It carries the weight of responsibility for the entire Ummah. That includes maintaining stability through diplomacy, even with those whose policies we do not fully endorse. Traoré leaned slightly forward. Diplomacy with oppressors at the expense of the oppressed is not stability. It is betrayal. And when Muslim leaders choose wealth and alliances over the cries of children in Gaza, in Yemen, in Africa, they lose moral authority. Gasps rippled through the audience. The Crown Prince's aides exchanged uneasy glances. Television commentators whispered into microphones for their live audiences. The prince replied with a sharp undertone. You speak as though the kingdom stands idle. We provide aid. We build infrastructure. We fund relief efforts in Africa. Traoré nodded briefly, but countered immediately. Charity that comes after profit from the same systems causing the suffering is not charity. It is guilt money. True Islam demands we dismantle oppression, not soften its image with donations. The moderator tried again to intervene, suggesting a shift to constructive dialogue. But by then, the confrontation had captured the imagination of millions watching live. Screens in cafes from Dar to Jakarta replayed clips within minutes, subtitled in different languages. In one viral moment, Traoré recited from memory, and establish weight in justice and do not make deficient the balance. Suri Rahman. Then he looked directly at the Crown Prince. Your Highness, balance means holding even the powerful to account. Are you ready to be held accountable by the people and by God? There was no immediate reply. Cameras caught the brief silence, framing it as a symbolic pause between old authority and rising defiance. The summit's agenda moved forward, but the room's energy never returned to its earlier state. Delegates whispered privately, some praising Traoré's courage, others warning that his bluntness could cost Burkina Faso valuable alliances. By the end of the day, international news outlets had shifted their focus entirely to the exchange. Headlines varied in tone. Tory challenges Saudi Crown Prince on live stage. Islamic leadership debate turns confrontational. And in some Western media, African leader questions Gulf power in rare public clash. Back in Ouagadougou, crowds gathered around public television screens, cheering when Traoré's words. Many saw him not just as their president, but as a voice for a generation of Africans who felt Islam had been co-opted by political elites. In Riyadh, the reaction was more cautious. Official state media downplayed the incident, summarizing the summit without mentioning the tense exchange. Behind closed doors, advisors debated whether to respond directly or ignore it to avoid amplifying the moment. Religious scholars across the Muslim world took sides. Some applauded Traoré for returning Islamic discourse to its prophetic roots centered on justice and equality. Others criticized him for challenging the custodian of the two holy mosques in a public forum, calling it disrespectful and divisive. Diplomatically, the aftermath was delicate. Within 48 hours, Saudi officials contacted Burkina Faso's foreign ministry requesting clarification on the president's remarks. Traoré reportedly told his advisors, "There is nothing to clarify when you speak the truth." The story continued to dominate social media for over a week. Memes appeared depicting Traoré standing over a chessboard opposite the Crown Prince, captioned "The Young Lion versus the Desert Kingdom." Influencers in Nigeria, Sudan, and Indonesia dissected the quotes, adding context from the Quran and Hadith. For many Africans, especially the youth, the exchange was a turning point, proof that their leaders could stand toe-to-toe with the wealthiest and most influential figures in the Muslim world. We have been told for too long to stay silent in the face of power. One university student in Bamako said, "Today we saw what it looks like to speak the truth, no matter who is in front of you." Traoré himself remained calm in public appearances afterward, neither escalating nor retracting his statements. In a Friday khutbah broadcast nationally, he referenced the incident indirectly. If you fear the reaction of men more than the judgment of God, you will always betray the mission entrusted to you. International analysts noted that while the clash might strain short-term relations with Saudi Arabia, it also positioned Traoré as a leading voice in a broader movement within the Muslim world, one that challenges entrenched political religious alliances. By the following month, the African Union quietly revised its protocols for open debates, likely in response to the uproar. But the moment could not be erased from public memory. The image of a young African leader standing against one of the most powerful princes in the world had already been etched into history. For those who watched live, it was not just a political confrontation. It was a theological standoff, a generational statement, and a reminder that even in the grand halls of diplomacy, the voice of truth can still disrupt the carefully rehearsed scripts of the powerful. And for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, it was another chapter in a presidency defined by defiance, principle, and the refusal to bow before any throne except that of